And then earlier this year, I moved to founding a company called Avela, which is focused on AI adoption. And I'll allude to some of the reasons later, but I formed that because I was realizing that the cultural aspects and the organizational change aspects were really, there was all this talk about where is AI adoption stalling. And we needed to spend more time on that than most technically focused teams are able to. So we're building that up as a really core part of our practice. And frankly, not always leading to a big build out at the end of the day. So that's who I am. And for the session today, this is a discussion about shadow AI intended for business leaders. Oops, sorry, I tend to do a bad job of advancing slides, so I'm going to apologize to everybody in advance if I keep bopping around a little bit. So we're going to talk about what is shadow AI and what's going on with it, why is it growing? We're going to talk about why we care, what are the risks that it brings, and then how we can handle it if given that it's an issue out there. So what is shadow AI? As I said, I'm in cloud, and so a few years, like about a decade ago, we would spend a lot of time with IT leaders talking about something called shadow IT, which for those of you that haven't heard that term before, was referring to the fact that various business units, people could go off and start tapping into technology resources on their own. So for me in cloud, a big aspect of it was that a business unit would go and build an app in AWS on their own without having to wait for the IT team, which was always kind of slower than they would like. Only then we'd run into issues of it wasn't really industrialized and ready for production. Like all of the, they were able to build it, but they didn't know all the best practices about securing it and things like that. And also people started to see IT costs rising across the overall organization because the spend was more distributed. So it was a big thing that people spent a lot of time thinking about. And this year, we started talking about something called shadow AI that's been coming up. And if you think about it, that's even a bigger deal than shadow IT would have been because to go off and get IT resources, you still kind of had to figure out how to get into AWS and spin resources up and have some technical know-how. And you had to have someone willing to pay a somewhat noticeable charge that had some P&L authority to do so. Whereas at this point, we all have AI on our phones. So the opportunity for pretty much anyone to go ahead and use it is really big. And that is what shadow AI is. It's the idea of employees using AI in a way that their company doesn't know about, wouldn't necessarily be happy with. Maybe they would. It'd be good if you just knew about it and isn't taking advantage of. And it is growing because of exactly that point about everybody being able to have it on its phones. If you think about it, the use of AI, and I've talked about this a lot in some other talks, and so we can have a side conversation about this one for an hour. But one of the complications about it right now is we have grown usage so much, and the technology is still so new. So if you think this is, according to ChatGPT, they have 700 million weekly users as of this summer. Well, that is global, but the ratio of that is higher in the United States. They're pointing out that's over 10% of any adult that could be using it worldwide. And again, ratio higher here. And that's just one of the tools. Over 75% of employed adults say that they can use AI. Now that question isn't about work. That's just a general, most employed people are using it at this point in the United States. And 1/5 say they use it daily. So there's a lot of usage going around and people playing around with it. But as I said, we're still pretty immature in the technology. If you think about the internet, within 3 years of when AOL was launched, we didn't even have a web browser yet. So if everyone's running around experimenting and playing and getting comfortable with this, well, the supporting ecosystem, most importantly, the tools that we need as businesses to feel comfortable using this internally are still being built out. And that's creating some conflict here in this case. I got interested in this subject because a year ago, and I still have all these conversations with leaders talking about how do we encourage our employees to be using AI? How do we get them past being afraid of AI? And then at the same time, you started hearing, well, first of all, I started wondering about this because you would see stories about every college student is cheating and using ChatGPT to write tests and essays and things. If that's the case. What's going on at work? And this summer, you started seeing stats about that were showing that it was a bit of an intriguing phenomenon going on of people were using it at work more than employers realized. So according to the MIT Nanda study that came out last month, 90% of workers are saying that they're using LLMs regularly at work, whereas only 40% of the respondents said that there was an LLM tool that the company had purchased. So right there's an inconsistency if people are doing more than theoretically they're enabled to be doing. Also, they're using AI more than leaders actually realize. Leaders still seem to be kind of worried more that people are running into friction with it. And to be clear, there are people who are. part of the challenges here is we've got different people at different spots in their AI adoption, in their comfort with AI. There's people that are ready to use it, people that aren't, people, it's all over the place. And we'll talk about that a little bit more too. But 3 times more people are using it frequently than their leaders realize, according to McKinsey. And then Gusto was one of the first couple of AI surveys that I saw this summer, and they found, they're an HR company, that 45% of US workers have used AI without telling their leaders about it at work. And 69% say they're not fully transparent about it. So they might allude a little bit to what they're doing, but not everything. So there definitely seems to be something going on here in terms of the usage being higher than we realize that people should be aware of. So why? Why are they hiding this? 4 big reasons. Either they're not really sure what they're supposed to be doing, because a lot of them say there's an unclear policy, there's lack of encouragement, they might be afraid of perception of their use, and they might not be happy with the tools that they've been given, so they're figuring out they can do more on their own. So again, I'm going to go through some more data. Sorry, I'm heavy on the data at the beginning of this to kind of lay out what's going on, and then we'll talk more about what to do with it. So first off, there is a mismatch between how leaders feel like they're doing and what workers say they're hearing in terms of the clarity of what to be doing with AI. People are spending a lot of time thinking about it, but it's not, there's survey after survey showing that it's not translating into what the average employee knows. So that's really important to think about from an organizational change management perspective and a communication perspective. So this is one survey, this is Gallup from pretty recently, where employees are saying, almost half of them are saying that their company is bringing out new AI tools, but only fewer than a quarter said that they're clear on what the company's strategy is and what they're supposed to be doing with those AI tools and what they're supposed to be using and not. And less than a third said that there's formal guidance on how to use it. And that's a big issue right there, because the how to use it question is somewhat complex. So we need to get that number up quickly is something for leaders to be thinking about. Number 2, even if they're encouraged to be using AI, we're starting to see some signals about, what do other workers think about with that, and that people are worried about it. And that's one that we're going to have to navigate through and bring people along as this AI adoption journey kind of continues and we all get past the 3-year mark and think about what it's using for us. But right now, today, that is showing through. So this was a study that came out in HBR, where it was a company that was actually pushing an AI adoption journey, and they had empowered their engineers with AI tools they wanted them to be using, and they were stalled out at adoption. So they started diving into why, and the researchers did a bunch of surveys, and they actually found, and this wasn't so much what the people were worried, how other people would think about them, but literally, if you ask Karen, what do you think about Emily if you know that she's using AI, a fair number of people thought less of the people using AI. It was 9% lower perception of their capability if they were open with the fact that they used AI than if they didn't appear to be. And that was worse for women, and it was worse for older users. And again, this was an engineering group, so kind of the people that are already struggling within that particular job framework were being penalized in terms of this is reinforcing assumptions about it. That's a hard one that we're going to have to keep working through and thinking about the practicalities of it as we're pushing adoption across an organization and what the trade-offs might be and how to encourage the perception of it as being a negative more aggressively to being a positive. It's going to require a lot of organizational change and thought as we think through that. And then the last one to call out is just employees aren't always happy with the tools that they've been given. And again, everything is moving so fast right now. This is a point I make in every talk that I have. It's really, really hard to pinpoint this point in time where the tools are versus that point in time, because they keep changing. But because of what I said at the beginning, where we have to worry as leaders about security, about regulation, about things like that, there's more care being put into what employers are making available to their teams than there necessarily is to what you could do on your phone. And that is leading then, in many cases, the workers to feel like, it doesn't really meet all of my needs. And I'm going to go and do it this way. This was a quote here that I love. This was again from Vinanda, of a lawyer who basically was saying, so, someone who's kind of a partner at the firm, but that she was frustrated with the restrictions that she had with the software that was provided, and she could do so much more with ChatGPT. By the way, she also said something else about the limits of ChatGPT that were addressed with the commercial software in terms of better remembering what was going on. So there's a trade-off she wasn't really recognizing there. But these are things that will improve over time. And as the ecosystem of tools is moving along, they'll keep getting better. But where they are today, there's still some limitations, and that's driving some frustration for the user base across employees. So does this matter? Yes, it matters because of a lot of security, reputational issues like that. Who here on the call remembers this noise about Deloitte this summer? Show of hands, anybody? Got one. Only one? Really? I felt like it was in my feed like every 10 seconds, but maybe that's because I'm in AI news a lot. So not only were there these headlines, but my LinkedIn feed is full of people asserting, like Deloitte has to refund money and proves, consulting is over and blah, 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 blah. But the short story is in Australia, there was a Deloitte project that clearly was done with ChatGPT without good human oversight. It was given to the government. They complained. Deloitte looked at it. It wasn't that great. They had to turn around. Anyone think that this was actually how Deloitte was telling their workers to go out and do their work for them? And Deloitte's all in on AI, but this was clearly not something that was sanctioned or wanted. Yet it was a huge reputational hit to them, not just again from the news, but from fueling the story of you don't need management consultants anyway. So this is not what Deloitte wanted. So reputational concern is really real with some of these issues if the usage isn't thought through. Another one, this is also, I don't know why the stories I have are out of Australia. It just seems like there's less quiet out of there, perhaps. But another one of a contractor that uploaded 3,000 individuals' personal information to do analysis and was considered a large breach and led to a big flurry about that. So you got to worry about if people are pasting data that you're concerned about into these chatbots, that's a concern because that's not very secure. And there's worried about do they remember them and can they share them with others and will they use them in their training data and all the things that you worry about with privacy with chatbots. Then anyone remember this one? This was also from this summer, about 2 months ago now, where people discovered that private chats were being indexed by Google. Anybody? Lily again. All right. So this came up where you could search and find what we clearly meant to be private chats as searchable results within Google. And the way that this was happening was because the user, and again, this was in the consumer version, which I'll get to in a second, was choosing to share it. So I'm going to use something innocuous. I'm working on making travel plans to go to Florida. I'm coming up with research ideas and I share it with Lily so that I'm talking to her about, do we want to do this together? And I send her my search. Because I sent it, it was then became public to anybody and could be picked up by indexing. And that's what it did. Now, ChatGPT very quickly went in and turned that off. So this is no longer the case. That was a big reputational concern for ChatGPT. So everybody freaked out and they turned it off. But it's little things like this, though, that should make us all worry about what other doors are open. And it's fine and dandy if it's my trip to Florida, but it's a whole other thing if it's a search that's on the client engagement I'm doing and thinking through it and all this raw stuff that you don't want going out there. Lily, did you have your hand up?
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just going to add to your on the Australia one. One thing that I thought was really interesting is that they actually have like an AI policy that is published on their website saying how they won't use, or if they do use AI, it'll be clearly monitored by a human, and they have their quality checks and everything. And so
Yeah,
they even had a process, but they didn't presumably use it or it didn't
follow
work.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that
Um,
the Deloitte one or the other one?
yeah, the Deloitte
Yeah.
one.
Deloitte
So
definitely has a policy that that worker didn't follow.
I
I
feel like it's
mean,
just adding to your argument that like there's this stuff happens even if you have quote unquote protections around it. Like the shadow
yeah.
use piece is like anyway, I just wanted to add to your story more than anything.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you can't spend enough time on it. And shying away from it because it's overwhelming is driving a huge risk to our organizations, is kind of the core of the point I want to make. That you've got every employee within your organization capable of introducing these risks. And we need to be really proactive about trying to manage that. I did have one more. So I'll throw in one more story out there, but really quickly, this was a Disney story. This one is older. This was from a year and a half ago, where he installed a new AI tool and ended up being a major security problem. The guy lost his job. It was a big issue. But kind of ties in with the data point I have from IBM that 9 of 10 IT leaders are concerned about security risks associated with AI, which again is pushing all the development of tools to try and lock this down more at the same time that users and workers are trying to go off and use it more. So the two are in kind of a race and in conflict is really where we are at the moment. So we have data leaks, we have security risks, we have regulatory compliance issues to worry about. We have financial costs because you can be liable for things that happen and or have to refund money or whatever else. And frankly, biggest of all, there's worry about reputational damage. These are all reasons to be worrying about shadow AI. So what can we do about it? Throw up our hands, give up. Probably not the best thing to do. It's happening. It's here. We have to think about it. So I said earlier that I shifted to the company I'm at right now to focus a little bit less on build out and more on working through the problems of where we are today. And one of the reasons I did that was because I literally was starting to want to just tell every client I was with last year to please just go give all your employees a commercial version of the chatbots. And here's why. Those are being built more and more to be secure and address a lot of the privacy, security, compliance concerns that a business has, whereas the consumer version that I can go and get on my own does not. And there also unleashes some other benefits, but from a risk management perspective, that is an investment in locking down the risk of your data getting out there. So for each of these platforms, you can kind of see the comparison of they are automatically not training on the chats unless it was contractually agreed, whereas otherwise you have to try in with your policy, explain to every employee how to go in and for each platform turn that off because there's something you do have to turn off to ensure that the data doesn't start getting remembered by them. There's better controls about the user, retention policies can be owned by the company, and compliance standards are there that are not there on the personal version. So these are all things that businesses want. And to give credit to each of these platforms, they have been working to build them in and respond to the demand that they have from their enterprise consumers. They are not doing the same on the consumer chatbot. So it's sort of like if you think about everyone has a personal email at this point. Like half of us are using them within Chief to talk to each other versus our professional ones. Because, I've had mine forever. You don't go to a new company and say, I'm not going to pony up the cost of, paying for Google Workspaces or Outlook, and you're just going to use your personal email. And I really think that's how businesses need to start thinking about a chatbot usage right now. If it's becoming so impactful to their employees and to the way of the future of the business, it needs to be something we think about taking on as a cost that we can also manage the usage and manage that you don't have me emailing with my personal email random secure files around everywhere. No one would agree to that. No one would want that happening. The second thing about the commercial chatbots, and I swear I don't get paid by any of these companies, they're doing fine. They don't need me shilling for them. But the second reason that I encourage businesses and business leaders to be really considering the expense of taking that on is the improving the productivity across your team. So again, part of the problem with shadow AI is it leaves all of the innovation quietly going on over here with Angela working on something and finding out something brilliant, but not sharing it with Rhonda. So that is a problem in terms of leveraging it better. We're going to start seeing, to the extent that this continues happening, super performers over here that no one really knows why they're super performing, which is great for them, but not great for the organization as a whole, which is only ticking up a little bit versus as much as it could be. We want to be able to tap into that more broadly across the organization. And one of the ways is to really be encouraging culturally, sharing examples of what you are doing, sharing how it's working. And frankly, if you're building something new, which all of them are, you can do, custom chats have been there forever. There's also things like skills now. Like there's a lot of tools being advanced and helping share productivity across teams. But to do that securely, you need to have a commercial version, period. The example of the Google indexing could also come up of I could build a chat GPT and share it with somebody else. But if I do it as a consumer version, it is now public to the world. Someone else can use it. So if I make a proposal generator under my free version or my personal version, I don't even have a free version, I have a pro version. But if I make a proposal generator with that and try and share it with my coworker and be like, oh, look how much better we can do. And we're tapping into all of our previous proposals and whatever, it is publicly out there in a risky link. Whereas if you do that within a commercial version, within Teams or within Enterprise, that can be shared just within your organization and controlled within who can access it. So in terms of leveraging more powerfully, the commercial chatbots are a really big deal. I can't say highly enough how much from a technical perspective, I encourage that. So that's number one. Then let's also think about good old AI usage policies. And admittedly, it's not just writing them, it's also conveying them, but the getting them together and thinking through that. There are a lot of companies that even leaders say they haven't written one yet. So there's a communication problem, but there is also this is confusing. I'm not even sure what I want to do with it yet. Putting the time in, I wouldn't even know where to start. That we do need to get over the hump and think through. Let's talk through what a policy needs to be for your organization in terms of, you want to encourage innovation. That's a good thing. I always try and write into the policy, but getting clear about what data can be used, what you think about what tools could be used with what data, how to have conversations around it, because bubbling up means you want to be able to actually have feedback loops of, oh, we should add this tool in, and what to do if there's an incident, and making sure that that's clearly communicated as well, because they're probably not caught very often and needing to catch those. So having the AI policy, and as part of that, and this is the bit that I said is kind of confusing for everybody, like the more complicated we make it for our users, the harder it is for them to follow a policy. So to have them, if the policy is everyone has to go and change your settings everywhere, probably a lot of that's going to fall through the cracks. But when it comes to the data, getting really crisp and over communicating on what types of data can be used in what tools. This is a sample layout of, just a basic green, yellow, red, black. But public data, use all the way. Still encourage using approved tools, but nothing special. Starting to be more careful when it starts being internal data, getting more sensitive with more sensitive data. By the way, this version is saying restricted. And that's where it's saying enterprise tools, so that you can have your compliance protections in there. That's where that type of thing becomes really important. It's not that you can never use PHI data. You just need to make sure that it's well managed in an appropriate place. And then black with things that never should get put in there. Now, again, this is new complexity for every worker out there. I mean, for the most part, there are email, checking what type of email it is. I know I've had that in enterprises, but for the most part, we don't have to work with this on a regular basis, because for the most part, we don't have this unanticipated open door that every user is working on. But laying this out really clearly and simply as much as possible, and laying options so that the answer isn't just no, opens the door that they can be productive in a way that's still being sensitive and safe about your data. So get the policy out there, get the rules, but from a cultural perspective, it is really incumbent upon the leaders to get aligned with each other and be encouraging innovation across the organization. If you want to move this from being just one person getting smart and innovative on their own about what they can do, to an organization being smart and innovative and sharing with one another, that needs to be encouraged as an ongoing cultural issue. I saw this from IT when we tried working on it on driving cloud. And so we realized how much organizational change is truly important to move from just adopting tools to actually use them in a more agile DevOpsy way. And here again, it's that on steroids, because it's the whole company. And being able to try and kind of reinforce encouragement of usage, recognizing and celebrating if people are sharing things, and talking and allowing that communication up as well, are all really important in this. I think the best case study, and I spent some time on talking about this in the last session of these I did on the Leader's Guide to AI Adoption, was I love Moderna's, which is that they simply gave everyone access to a commercial chatbot and let them go. And they have basically everybody who's sitting at a desk using it at this point. Because along the way, they didn't just simply do that. They spent a lot of time encouraging the use of it. They simply did that from a tool perspective, but from a usage perspective, they were doing regular check-ins. They were celebrating on a regular basis people who shared GPTs with each other that were well used and well rewarded. They would celebrate them. They would encourage that. And so they were really making a focused, proactive effort to drive a culture of innovation using the AI across the organization. Because it also gets back to the fear of perception and what is the rules. So if the organizational stance and the organizational strategy is kind of said once and forgot about, it's easy to be really uncomfortable with what really is it. And frankly, if the organizational strategy gets communicated, but you've got some leaders kind of being like, doesn't really matter. And, I don't get this AI stuff anyway, it really undercuts it. We see that a lot. So the continual reinforcement and focus on trying to drive that culture of innovation is just so important, because otherwise people will continue to be concerned of what is the perception of that, both from my leaders and from my peers, and be more stifled. And you will not tap into group innovation. You'll be left with just silos of individual innovation. And that's the biggest chasm that you want to cross. There's the managing the risk, but there's also the unlocking the innovation piece of getting beyond shadow AI. And I kind of just talked about it with this pretty slide, but the next one I was just going to say is freaking communication, communication, communication. Anybody in change management, whom I am not an expert, but I've sure learned enough from enough of them, will just reinforce how important that is over and over again. And this is a case in which I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be thinking about it and focusing on it and putting in the energy. The leadership alignment and consistency that I just talked about is critical. So I spent a lot of time when working through these initiatives with leaders, pulling all of them from a cross-functional perspective in a room and trying to work through where everybody is at different points in time. And by the way, that's not even necessarily a conflict thing. It's also, you might have the CTO or people on his team her team who've been tasked with thinking about this 2 years ago and are running around trying to figure out how to use it. And then everybody else wasn't really part of that conversation in the first place because they were just told, go run, you own this, and it's on your shoulders to make it happen. And then other people are catching up and realizing it's interesting, but man, the conversation is really confusing. It's all these tools, all these models going on, what's even going on. It's hard to contribute. So we got to get past the bringing, making sure the conversation can be at a level that everyone can have and bringing everyone along to the same place. And then speaking with a consistent voice across the organization in terms of what our objectives are, how we're going to use this, how this impacts the workforce, the desire for, managing concerns around whether it's going to impact them negatively or positively, and being consistent with that. That clear top-down message, vision, and guardrails. And then the other piece is also ensuring that you get the bottoms-up innovation, because more and more we're seeing, and this is kind of what I was getting into with letting people share chats and things, the true innovation starts happening at the team level, where people really do understand their work, understand the repetitive basis. That's why these bits of shadow AI are so valuable. We've got these top-down innovations that we've been pushing for a while. That's great for really big picture, move the needle projects, but no leader knows everything that every member of their team is doing and how exactly every workflow is going. So you want to be able to make sure you're also getting the bottoms up, you're getting people experimenting, again, rewarding, celebrating, and sharing and building on what they might be doing. So those are the big things to be thinking about when thinking about how to manage shadow AI. It is a real concern, but we do have potential to really unlock it and unleash innovation with the organization if you can find and nurture those examples, move them over to a safer space, and bring them across the rest of the organization. And so the way to do that is to be thinking about what tools you're giving them and trying to make them better as possible. So there's cases in which you will have shortcomings, but at least don't leave the really obvious ones of you're not even enabling a basic chatbot when you know that they can use it on the table. Working through what the usage policy is, communicating the heck out of it, excuse me, and then driving that culture of encouraging the innovation and the experimentation. That is it. I do want to say thank you. I'll do questions in a second. Before I do it, I want to take a moment to say thank you to everybody. And also for anyone who is on this call, if you are interested, we do have a discount for chief members that you're welcome to use for the Avalia workshop and also foundations training, which is focused on bringing all of the leadership team or a broader audience up to that level where you can have these conversations and be thinking practically about the use of AI. So feel free to contact me or reach out if you're interested in that. And any questions that haven't been asked yet in the session.